I don't care if you came all the way from Europe. That accent, I won't have it in my house. You're not what I expected. The words hit harder than the Kansas wind that had greeted Mara Vesna at the train station just an hour before. She stood in the banker's parlor, her one suitcase still clutched in trembling hands, watching the man who was supposed to be her husband turn his back on her forever. 3 months crossing the ocean. 3 letters that promised a new life. 1 photograph of a man who now looked at her like she was nothing. But this rejection? It was only the beginning. If you want to know how a woman with nothing but courage and a foreign tongue conquered the American frontier, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train had been Mara's entire world for 6 days before it finally gasped to a stop in Willow Ridge, Kansas. She had watched America unfold through a smudged window, endless fields that swallowed the horizon, towns that appeared and vanished like brief promises. Skies so vast they made her feel impossibly small. Everything she owned fit into one scuffed leather suitcase. 3 dresses she'd sewn herself, her mother's silver hairbrush, a bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine, and a book of poetry in her native tongue that she couldn't bear to leave behind. 23 years old, and she was crossing into a future built entirely on faith. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped down. Late afternoon sun cut across the weathered wood, and wind, that merciless prairie wind, immediately found every gap in her traveling coat. She had never felt wind like this in the old country. This wind had teeth. Miss Vesna. A young man in a clerk's vest approached, his face neutral, professional. Not the banker, not Thomas Caldwell, the man whose photograph she'd studied until she'd memorized every feature. This was someone sent to fetch her, like luggage. Yes, Mara said, and immediately saw his expression change. That flicker, that subtle recoil. She'd been in America for less than 2 minutes, and already her accent had marked her. Mr. Caldwell sent me to bring you to his residence, the clerk said, speaking slowly now, as if she might not understand. Do you have more bags? Only this one. He looked at her suitcase, then at her, and something like pity crossed his face. This way, ma'am. The town of Willow Ridge was smaller than she'd imagined. One main street lined with wooden storefronts, their painted signs already fading under the relentless sun. A general store, a hotel, a dress shop with lace curtains in the window, a saloon where men gathered on the porch even in daylight. Everything looked temporary, as if the whole town might pick up and move on tomorrow. The clerk led her to a tidy white house set back from the main road, surrounded by a fence that looked too perfect, too deliberate. Roses climbed one side of the porch, the only spot of color in a landscape dominated by brown and dust and endless sky. Wait here, the clerk said, and disappeared inside. Mara stood on the porch, her heart hammering. She smoothed her traveling dress, tucked a strand of dark hair back into place, tried to steady her breathing. This was the moment everything changed. This was where her new life began. The door opened. Thomas Caldwell was exactly as his photograph promised, tall, well-dressed, with neat brown hair and a face that suggested prosperity and control. He was perhaps 40, with the kind of solid bearing that came from never having doubted his place in the world. But when he looked at her, there was no warmth, no welcome. Miss Vesna. His voice was clipped, formal. Please, come in. She followed him into a parlor that spoke of careful taste and considerable money. Dark wood furniture, a Persian rug, curtains that matched the upholstery. Everything coordinated, everything in its place. He did not invite her to sit. I must be honest with you, Caldwell began, and Mara felt her stomach drop. The correspondence we exchanged was misleading. Misleading. The word came out shakier than she wanted. Your letters gave no indication of... He gestured vaguely at her. Your accent is quite pronounced. Assumed, given your written English, that you would sound American. The room seemed to tilt. I learned English from books. I thought... What you thought doesn't matter now. His tone was final, dismissive. I am a respected member of this community. I cannot have a wife who sounds like... He stopped himself, but the damage was already done. Like what? Mara's voice was barely a whisper. Foreign. Uncultured. Do you understand what I'm saying? She understood perfectly. She had crossed an ocean, spent the last of her family's savings, left behind everything she'd ever known, and now she was being rejected because of how she sounded when she spoke. The contract, she started. There was no legal contract, Miss Vesna, only letters. Letters which, as I've said, were misleading. He pulled an envelope from his vest pocket. I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house. 2 weeks' rent paid in advance. That should give you sufficient time to secure return passage. Return passage? The words felt like stones in her mouth. Back to wherever you came from. He held out the envelope. When she didn't take it, he set it on the small table beside her. I'm sorry it didn't work out, truly. But he didn't look sorry. He looked relieved, eager to have this unpleasant business concluded. I have no money for passage home, Mara said. I used everything to come here. Something hardened in Caldwell's face. Then I suggest you find employment. Willow Ridge may be small, but there are opportunities for those willing to work. You brought me here. Her voice was stronger now, anger beginning to burn through the shock. You wrote me letters. You sent your photograph. You made promises. And you misrepresented yourself. He moved toward the door, making it clear the conversation was over. Clarence will take you to the boarding house. I wish you the best of luck, Miss Vesna. Just like that, she was dismissed. The ride to Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house took less than 5 minutes. Clarence the clerk didn't speak, didn't meet her eyes. When they stopped in front of a narrow 2-story house with peeling paint and a crooked porch rail, he simply pointed. Mrs. Kowalski will show you your room. Rent's paid through the end of next week. Then he was gone, and Mara was standing alone on another unfamiliar porch, in another unfamiliar place, with her one suitcase and a future that had just shattered into pieces. Mrs. Kowalski turned out to be a round woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and flour on her apron. She looked Mara up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd seen too many desperate people come through her door. You're the mail-order bride Caldwell rejected, she said. Not a question. Mara's throat tightened. Yes. He's a fool. Mrs. Kowalski stepped aside. But you probably figured that out already. Come in. Your room's upstairs, second door on the left. Supper's at 6. You're late. You don't eat. The room was small and spare. A narrow bed, a washstand, a chair by the window, a hook on the wall for hanging clothes. But it was clean, and the window overlooked a small garden where early vegetables were just beginning to push through the soil. Mara set down her suitcase and sat on the bed. The mattress creaked under her weight. Outside, she could hear voices from the street, the distant sound of a hammer, the wind that never seemed to stop. She did not cry. She had not cried when her mother died. She had not cried when she'd said goodbye to her sister at the train station in the old country. She had learned early that tears solved nothing. Instead, she unpacked her suitcase with careful, deliberate movements. 3 dresses on the hook, hairbrush on the washstand, letters and poetry book in the drawer. When everything was in its place, she sat by the window and watched the sun drop toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow, she would find work. Tomorrow, she would begin building whatever came next. Tomorrow, she would prove that Thomas Caldwell had made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning arrived too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Mara woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and the smell of bacon drifting up from Mrs. Kowalski's kitchen. She dressed in her best remaining dress, the blue one with buttons down the front, and pinned her hair into a neat bun that her mother would have approved of. At breakfast, she was the only boarder. Mrs. Kowalski served eggs and bread without comment, but when Mara stood to leave, the older woman spoke. Where are you planning to look for work? Anywhere that will have me. Mrs. Kowalski made a sound that might have been sympathy or skepticism. You speak any English besides what I'm hearing? This is all I have. Then you'd better have thick skin to go with it. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat heavily in the chair across from Mara. People here don't trust what they don't understand, and they don't understand accents. Mr. Caldwell made that clear. Thomas Caldwell is a pompous ass who cares more about appearances than substance, but he's not wrong about the town. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes were kind despite her blunt words. You're going to face a lot of closed doors today. Don't take it personal. How else should I take it? As information. The people who won't hire you. You don't want to work for them anyway. She stood, collected the dishes. There's a dress shop on Main Street, Miss Perry's place. She might be worth trying. Lost her seamstress last month. It was the first kindness anyone had shown Mara since she'd arrived. She felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Miss Perry's half-deaf and meaner than a snake with a stomachache. But she judges work, not words. Mara started at the dress shop. It was a small establishment wedged between the general store and a barber shop, with a front window displaying a navy walking suit on a headless mannequin. A bell chimed when Mara pushed open the door. The interior smelled of fabric and lavender sachets. Bolts of cloth lined one wall, organized by color. A sewing machine sat in the corner and patterns hung from hooks like pressed flowers. An elderly woman appeared from the back room. She had white hair pulled into a severe bun and spectacles that magnified her pale eyes into something almost alarming. "We're not open yet," she said. "Miss Perry, my name is Mara Vesna. I heard you might need a seamstress." The woman's expression didn't change. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Kowalski. Anna Kowalski talks too much." But Miss Perry moved closer, studying Mara with those magnified eyes. "You know how to sew?" "Yes, ma'am. I made this dress I'm wearing. I can show you the stitching, Stop. Miss Perry held up one hand. "That accent. Where are you from?" Mara's heart sank. "I came from Europe, but I work very hard and I learn quickly, and I didn't ask for your life story. I asked where you're from." Miss Perry's face was unreadable. "Customers don't like foreign help, makes them nervous. They think you might steal or overcharge or who knows what nonsense people convince themselves of." "I wouldn't. I'm sure you wouldn't, but what you would or wouldn't do doesn't matter if customers won't walk through the door." Miss Perry moved back toward her counter. "I'm sorry, I can't help you." The bell chimed again as Mara stepped back into the morning sunlight. One rejection. Mrs. Kowalski had warned her. She tried the hotel next. The manager was a thin man with suspicious eyes and hands that never stopped moving. He looked at her application, the one she'd carefully written out the night before, and frowned. "We need someone who can talk to guests. Americans. You understand?" "I understand English very well." "But you don't sound English. You sound—" He waved his hand vaguely. "Foreign. Our guests expect a certain standard." I can meet any standard you require." "I'm sure you think you can." He handed back her application. "But I need someone who sounds professional. Someone American." Someone American, as if her accent erased everything else she was or could be. The laundry was next. Then the general store, then a restaurant that needed a cook, then a farm supply store that needed a clerk. Everywhere, the same pattern. They would look at her application, they would listen to her speak, and then, politely or not, they would send her away. By noon, Mara's feet hurt and her dress was dusty from walking up and down Main Street. She had knocked on every door, asked at every business. No one wanted her. She found herself at the edge of town where the buildings ended and the prairie began. Just miles and miles of grass, rolling gently toward a horizon so far away it seemed impossible. The sky was enormous, cloudless, relentlessly blue. This was supposed to be her new beginning. This was supposed to be where everything changed. Instead, she was alone, unemployed, and running out of time. Mara was about to turn back toward the boarding house when she heard it, a sound like thunder, but wrong. Too rhythmic, too violent. She turned. Down the dirt road, a wagon was racing toward town, completely out of control. Two horses, wild-eyed and panicked, were pulling it at a dead run. The wagon careened from side to side, wheels bouncing over ruts, the whole thing threatening to overturn at any moment. And on the seat, barely hanging on, was a man shouting words she couldn't make out over the thunder of hooves. People on the street scattered. Someone screamed. The horses were heading straight into town, straight toward the storefronts and the people and the chaos that would come if someone didn't stop them. Mara didn't think. She stepped directly into the path of the runaway team. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain what made her do it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was just that she had nothing left to lose. The horses saw her and tried to veer, but she was already moving toward them, her hands up, her voice steady despite the terror pounding in her chest. She began to sing. It was a lullaby from her childhood, something her mother had sung when Mara was small and frightened by thunderstorms. She sang it in her native tongue, the words flowing out in a melody older than memory. The horse's ears flickered forward, their wild eyes fixed on her. She kept singing, kept moving closer, her voice rising above the sound of their panic. She reached for the nearest horse's bridle, her fingers finding the leather, and the horse, impossibly, slowed. The second horse followed its partner's lead. The wagon shuddered to a stop less than 20 feet from the general store's front porch. Silence fell like a curtain. Mara stood with both hands on the lead horse's bridle, still humming softly, while the animal's sides heaved and foam dripped from its mouth. The horse lowered its head, pressing against her shoulder as if seeking comfort. Holy hell! The voice came from the wagon. The driver, a man in his early 30s with sun-weathered skin and dark hair, was staring at her like she'd just walked on water. How did you... He stopped, shook his head. I've been working with horses my whole life, and I've never seen anything like that. Mara's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her. They were frightened. I helped them not be frightened anymore. The man climbed down from the wagon, moving carefully, as if sudden movement might break whatever spell she'd cast. Up close, he was tall and lean, with eyes that were some shade between brown and green, and calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. I'm Cole Bennett, he said, and I'm pretty sure you just saved my life. Maybe a few other lives, too. Mara Vesna. Well, Miss Vesna. He paused, registering her accent for the first time, and Mara braced herself for the familiar look of dismissal, but it didn't come. Instead, Cole Bennett smiled. That's the prettiest sound I've heard since coming to Kansas. What language was that? Mara blinked. You want to know? Course I want to know. You just stopped a runaway team by singing to them. I'm curious about everything right now. People were starting to gather, townspeople drawn by the commotion, staring at the stopped wagon and the strange foreign woman who'd somehow prevented disaster. Mara saw Thomas Caldwell among them, standing on the hotel porch with his perfectly pressed suit and his expression of distaste. She straightened her shoulders and looked back at Cole Bennett. It's from my home country. A lullaby. I don't know why I thought of it. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Cole was checking the horses now, running his hands over their legs and flanks, making sure they weren't injured. These two got spooked by a snake about a mile out, took off before I could get them under control. Are they hurt? Don't think so, just scared, like you said. He looked at her again, and there was something in his gaze that made her chest tighten. Not pity, not condescension, something closer to respect. You have a way with animals. I grew up around horses. My father... She stopped. Her father was part of the life she'd left behind, and there was no point in bringing that past into this moment. But Cole was watching her with interest, not judgment. Your father what? He worked with horses. He taught me that fear makes them dangerous, but calm makes them gentle. Smart man. Cole finished his inspection and straightened. Look, Miss Vesna, I don't know your situation, but I could use someone with your skills. Mara's heart jumped. What? I run a ranch about 5 miles out of town. Nothing fancy, but I'm building something good. Problem is, I'm terrible with the horses. Oh, I can ride and work them, but I don't have your touch, and I'm a disaster in the house. Can't cook worth a damn, and the place looks like a barn most days. He seemed to realize how that sounded and added quickly, I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher. She's about 100 years old and twice as stubborn. She'd be there the whole time, proper and all that, but I could use help, real help. It was the opportunity Mara had been searching for all morning. Work, money, a chance to stay. But she'd learned to be suspicious of generous offers. Why would you hire me? You just met me. Because you just did something I've never seen anyone else do. Because you stepped in front of a runaway team without flinching. And because... He hesitated, then seemed to decide honesty was the best approach. Because everyone else in this town is going to judge you for how you sound instead of what you can do. And that's their loss. Mara felt something crack open inside her chest. It wasn't quite hope. She'd given up on that around the 4th rejection, but it was something close. When would I start? Cole's smile widened. How about Monday? That'll give you time to get your things in order. I'll pick you up at Mrs. Kowalski's at first light. What's the pay? Room, board, and $15 a month to start. More if things work out. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than nothing, more than a ticket back to a country where she had nothing waiting for her. I'll be ready. They shook hands there in the middle of the street, while the town watched and whispered, and Thomas Caldwell frowned from his porch like he'd just witnessed something deeply improper. Let them whisper, Mara thought. Let them frown. She had crossed an ocean to claim a future, and maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found the first piece of it. Cole climbed back onto the wagon, gathered the reins, and tipped his hat to her. See you Monday, Miss Vesna. The horses responded to his hands calmly now. All the panic burned out of them. The wagon rolled away down the street, leaving Mara standing in the dust with her heart pounding and her hands still trembling. Well, said a voice behind her. Mara turned to find Mrs. Kowalski standing there with her arms crossed, and something like approval in her eyes. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Maybe both. Maybe. Mrs. Kowalski started walking back toward the boarding house, and Mara fell into step beside her. Cole Bennett's a good man, honest, works hard. Lost his wife about 3 years back. Been trying to run that ranch solo ever since, and it's killing him. He has a housekeeper. Mrs. Fletcher. That woman has been dying for 10 years and refuses to finish the job. She can barely stand, let alone clean or cook. Mrs. Kowalski glanced at Mara. You'll be doing most of the work, you understand that? I'm not afraid of work. No, I don't imagine you are. They reached the boarding house and Mrs. Kowalski paused on the porch. You made an impression today. People are going to talk. They were already talking. True enough. Mrs. Kowalski's expression softened. But they'll talk different now. You saved Cole Bennett's life. That means something in a town this small. Mara wasn't sure if it meant enough to change how people saw her, but for the first time since stepping off that train, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the prairie wind rattle the window frame. In 2 days, she would leave this boarding house and move to a ranch she'd never seen, to work for a man she'd just met, alongside a housekeeper who was apparently more ghost than woman. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in weeks, Mara Vesna fell asleep smiling. Monday morning came with a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Mara was awake before dawn, her few belongings already packed back into the scuffed leather suitcase. She'd spent Sunday washing and mending her dresses, preparing herself for whatever came next. Mrs. Kowalski had given her a loaf of bread and a jar of preserves as a parting gift, refusing payment with a wave of her flour-dusted hand. You'll need your money more than I do, the older woman had said. And besides, you made my week interesting. That's worth something. Now Mara stood on the porch in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the eastern horizon begin to lighten. Somewhere out there, 5 miles beyond the edge of town, was a ranch she'd never seen and a future she couldn't quite imagine. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Cole Bennett appeared down the street, driving the same wagon she'd stopped 3 days ago, the same 2 horses now calm and steady in their traces. He pulled up in front of the boarding house and climbed down, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his own skin. Morning, Miss Vesna. You ready? Ready as I'll ever be. He took her suitcase and loaded it into the wagon bed with a gentleness that surprised her. Most men would have just tossed it. It's about an hour's drive. Road's decent this time of year, but it gets rough after the rains. Mara climbed up onto the wagon seat, arranging her skirts carefully. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, and there was something comforting about that, the evidence of hard work, of a life built through persistence rather than privilege. Cole settled beside her and clicked his tongue at the horses. They moved forward smoothly, and Willow Ridge began to fall away behind them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wagon rattled along a dirt road that cut straight through the prairie like a scar. On both sides, grass stretched endlessly, broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood trees marking where creeks ran. The sky was growing lighter by the minute, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. You ever seen land like this before? Cole asked eventually. Never. In my country, there are mountains, forests, everything close together. Mara gestured at the endless horizon. This is, different. Different good or different bad? She considered. Different honest. There's nowhere to hide out here. Cole glanced at her with something like approval. That's the truth of it. The prairie doesn't lie. If you're weak, it finds you out quick. If you're strong, he paused. Well, it finds that out too. And which are you? Still trying to figure that out, I suppose. He said it lightly, but Mara heard the weight beneath the words. Lost my wife Sarah 3 years back. Fever took her in less than a week. After that, I thought about selling the ranch, moving back east where my sister lives. But I couldn't do it. This land, it's got its hooks in me. I'm sorry about your wife. Appreciate that. Cole was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Fletcher, you'll meet her soon enough. She says Sarah's still here somehow. Says she feels her in the house sometimes. I don't know about all that, but I know the place feels empty without her. Mara understood emptiness. She'd left her mother's grave thousands of miles behind, left her sister married to a shopkeeper in a town Mara would probably never see again. Sometimes emptiness was just the price you paid for moving forward. How long have you had the ranch? Built it 6 years ago with Sarah. Started with nothing but a claim and a lot of foolish optimism. Cole smiled at the memory. First winter nearly killed us. Second winter nearly killed the cattle. But we survived. And then just when things were getting good, when we were finally making the ranch into something, he stopped. Well, life doesn't ask permission before it changes everything. The sun was fully up now, burning away the last of the morning cool. Mara could see sweat already darkening Cole's shirt between his shoulder blades. This was going to be a hot day. Why did you really hire me? She asked. The question had been circling in her mind since Friday. You don't know anything about me except that I can calm horses. Cole was silent for so long that Mara thought he might not answer. Then he said, You want the honest truth? Always. Because when those horses were running wild and everyone else was running away, you ran toward the danger. And because when I told you what language you were singing in, you didn't apologize for it. You didn't make yourself smaller to fit what you thought I wanted. He looked at her directly. I've had enough of people who apologize for who they are. I'd rather work with someone who knows their own worth. Something in Mara's chest loosened. She'd been carrying Thomas Caldwell's rejection like a stone, letting it weigh down every interaction, every conversation. But here was someone who saw her accent not as a flaw, but as simply a part of who she was. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. You haven't met Mrs. Fletcher. The ranch appeared gradually, emerging from the prairie like something inevitable. First the windmill, its blades turning slowly in the morning breeze. Then the barn, a sturdy structure that looked well-maintained. Then the house itself, a simple 2-story building with a wraparound porch and shutters that had once been painted green but were now faded to the color of sage. It wasn't grand. It wasn't the kind of house Thomas Caldwell would have owned, with its Persian rugs and coordinated curtains. But there was something solid about it, something real. This was a house built for living, not for impressing visitors. Cole pulled the wagon up near the porch and set the brake. Well, here we are. Before Mara could respond, the front door banged open and a voice like gravel in a bucket rang out. About damn time! I've been waiting on you since sunup, and breakfast is getting cold. The woman who emerged from the house was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, and appeared to be held together primarily by sheer stubbornness. Her hair was white and wild, escaping from pins that had long since given up trying to contain it. She wore a faded apron over a dress that might have been black once but was now some indeterminate shade of gray, and her eyes, sharp and bright as a hawk's, fixed on Mara with immediate suspicion. This her? Mrs. Fletcher, this is Miss Mara Vesna. Miss Vesna, this is... I can introduce myself, boy. I'm not dead yet, despite what the town seems to think, Mrs. Fletcher came down the porch steps with surprising speed for someone who supposedly could barely stand. She stopped directly in front of Mara and looked her up and down like a general inspecting troops. You're younger than I expected, and foreign. Yes, ma'am. Can you cook? Yes. Can you clean? Yes. Can you deal with stubborn animals, broken equipment, and men who think they know better than they do? Mara glanced at Cole, who was trying very hard not to smile. I'm learning. Mrs. Fletcher made a sound that might have been approval or might have been indigestion. Well, you got backbone at least. That accent of yours going to be a problem? Only for people who can't hear past it. This time Mrs. Fletcher definitely smiled. It transformed her whole face, revealing someone who'd once been beautiful and was still formidable. I like you. Don't make me regret it. She turned to Cole. Boy, get her things and show her to the upstairs room. The one with the east window. And then come eat before everything's ruined. Cole grabbed Mara's suitcase and gestured toward the house. Welcome to the Bennett Ranch. It's not much, but it's perfect, Mara said, and meant it. The inside of the house was as simple as the outside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a long wooden table in the center. Stairs led up to the second floor, and Mara could see doors opening off a narrow hallway. Everything was clean but worn. The furniture had the look of things used daily and cared for carefully. There were no decorations except for a single photograph on the mantel, a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile. Sarah, Mara thought, the wife who'd built this place and then left it too soon. Your room's up here, Cole said, leading her upstairs. He opened a door to reveal a small bedroom with slanted ceilings and a window that looked out over the prairie. There was a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a washstand. It's not fancy. It's mine, Mara said. That makes it perfect. Cole set down her suitcase and moved toward the door. I'll let you settle in. Breakfast is in 10 minutes, and Mrs. Fletcher doesn't believe in second chances when it comes to mealtimes. Alone in the room, Mara moved to the window. From here, she could see the barn, the windmill, and beyond that, miles of grassland rolling away toward distant hills. The sky was enormous, relentlessly blue, and the wind made the grass move like waves on an ocean. This was her new home. This simple room in a simple house on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd boarded that ship months ago. It wasn't the life Thomas Caldwell had promised in his letters. But standing there in the morning light, watching the prairie stretch toward infinity, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she could breathe. Breakfast turned out to be eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee, strong enough to strip paint. Mrs. Fletcher served it without ceremony, slapping plates down on the table and then sitting with her own portion, eating in silence while she watched Mara with those sharp hawk eyes. So, the old woman said eventually, Cole tells me you stopped his runaway horses by singing to them. I did. In what language? Mara hesitated. This was usually where people decided she was too foreign, too different, too much of a risk, but she'd already decided not to make herself smaller. My native language. From the old country. And where's that? Eastern Europe. Mrs. Fletcher considered this while chewing a piece of bacon. I came from Ireland when I was 16. Worked as a maid in Boston for 20 years before I came west. You know what they called us back then? Dirty Irish. Said we were drunks and thieves and not fit to work in decent houses. She took a sip of coffee. People fear what they don't understand, and they hate what they fear. You'll face that here. I've already faced it in town. Town's nothing. Wait until the neighboring ranchers come around. Wait until you have to go to the general store or the church social. That's when you'll find out who you really are. Cole cleared his throat. Mrs. Fletcher. Oh, hush. I'm not trying to scare her off. I'm trying to prepare her. The old woman turned back to Mara. You seem like you got steel in you. You'll need it. This life, ranching, I mean, it'll break you if you let it. Weather, animals, prices, disease, accidents. There's 100 ways to fail and only one way to succeed. Which is? Don't quit. No matter what. Mrs. Fletcher stood and began collecting plates. Now, you'll start by learning the house. I'll show you where everything is, what needs doing daily, what can wait. Cole will teach you about the animals and the land, and we'll all figure out if this arrangement works. And if it doesn't? Mara asked. Mrs. Fletcher's smile was sharp. Then you'll be the first person to fail on this ranch who wasn't broken by it. But I don't think you will. The next few days passed in a blur of learning. Mrs. Fletcher, despite her age and her supposed frailty, proved to be an exacting teacher. She showed Mara how to manage the wood stove, how to preserve food, how to make soap from lye and animal fat, how to mend clothes so the stitches didn't show. Every task had a right way and a wrong way, and Mrs. Fletcher never hesitated to correct Mara when she strayed toward the wrong. But there was kindness beneath the criticism. When Mara burned her hand on the stove, Mrs. Fletcher had salve ready before Mara could even cry out. When Mara struggled to understand how the complex system of water pumps worked, Mrs. Fletcher explained it 3 different ways until it made sense. "You're a quick learner," the old woman said one afternoon while they were scrubbing the kitchen floor. "That'll serve you well out here. Can't afford to be slow when a problem shows up. In my country, my mother taught me that work is how you prove yourself. Not words, not promises. Work. Smart woman, your mother." She was. Mara sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair out of her face. "She died 2 years ago. That's when I decided to come to America." Mrs. Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother died on the ship from Ireland. Cholera. They wrapped her in canvas and dropped her in the ocean." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Mara heard the old grief underneath. "I was 16 and alone in a country where I didn't speak the language right and didn't know the customs. Everyone told me to go back, but I couldn't. There was nothing to go back to." "So you stayed." "I stayed. Worked myself half to death. Married a man who turned out to be a drunk. Lost 2 babies before they could draw breath. Finally came west after my husband drank himself into an early grave." Mrs. Fletcher dunked her scrub brush in the bucket. "Made it to Kansas, worked for Sarah's family, and then worked for her when she married Cole. This ranch is the only home I've had that ever felt like mine." Mara understood. Home wasn't always about blood or birth. Sometimes it was about finding the place where you could finally stop running. Cole, meanwhile, was teaching her the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to recognize the different cattle by sight, learned which horses were reliable and which ones had temperaments that required careful handling. She learned to read the sky for signs of weather, learned how to check fence lines for damage, learned the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch functioning. "You're taking to this better than I expected," Cole said one morning as they worked together to move a small herd from one pasture to another. "Most people from back east can't handle the isolation." "I'm not from back east." "True enough," he grinned. "And you're not like most people anyway." Mara felt heat rise in her cheeks and focused intently on the cattle. There was something in the way Cole looked at her sometimes, not with the calculating appraisal Thomas Caldwell had used, but with something warmer, more genuine. It made her nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, partly to change the subject. "What are you trying to build here?" Cole pushed his hat back and surveyed the land around them. "My father had a farm in Missouri. Good land, but he lost it when I was 12. Bank took it. We ended up sharecropping for a man who treated us like we were less than the dirt we worked. I swore I'd never work land that wasn't mine again." "So you came here?" "Came here with Sarah and $20 to our names. Filed a claim, built a house, started with 10 head of cattle and a lot of hope." His expression softened. Sarah had the real vision. She saw what this place could be, not just a ranch, but a real operation. Quality cattle, good breeding stock, a reputation that would carry us through the hard times. And now? Now I'm trying to honor what she started, build it into something that lasts, something that can't be taken away. He looked at Mara. "That probably sounds foolish." "Sounds like the only thing worth doing." They worked in companionable silence after that, moving the cattle with practiced efficiency. Mara was learning Cole's rhythms too, when to speak and when to let the quiet settle, when to ask questions and when to simply observe. He was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain things as many times as necessary. But she noticed other things too. The way his shoulders tensed when he looked at the horizon, as if constantly expecting trouble. The careful way he maintained every piece of equipment, fixing small problems before they became big ones. The loneliness that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was watching. Cole Bennett was a man trying to build something permanent in a place where nothing was guaranteed. And somehow, Mara had become part of that building. 2 weeks after Mara arrived, Cole announced they needed to go into town for supplies. "Mrs. Fletcher made a list," he said over breakfast. Flour, sugar, coffee, a few other things we can't make or grow ourselves. Usually I go alone, but he hesitated. I thought you might want to come. See if there's anything you need. Mara's stomach tightened. She hadn't been back to Willow Ridge since the day Cole had hired her. The thought of facing those closed doors again, those dismissive faces, made her want to refuse. But Mrs. Fletcher was watching her with those sharp eyes. Can't hide forever, girl. Town's part of life out here. I'm not hiding. Then prove it. So an hour later, Mara found herself sitting beside Cole on the wagon seat again, watching Willow Ridge grow larger on the horizon. Her hands were clenched in her lap, and she forced herself to relax them, to breathe slowly, to remember that she was different now. She wasn't the desperate woman who'd been rejected by Thomas Caldwell. She was someone who'd proven herself capable, someone who belonged somewhere. The town hadn't changed. Same wooden storefronts, same dusty street, same people going about their business. But when Cole pulled the wagon up in front of the general store, Mara noticed something different. People were staring. Not with the dismissive glances she'd received before, but with open curiosity. Whispers followed them as they climbed down from the wagon. Let them talk, Cole said quietly. You haven't done anything wrong. Inside the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Hastings, a round man with mutton-chop whiskers, looked up from his counter and froze. Mr. Bennett, Miss... He clearly couldn't remember Mara's name. Miss Vesna, Cole supplied. We need some supplies. Of course. Of course. Hastings bustled forward, suddenly eager to please. I heard you were working out at the Bennett place now. Quite a change from, well, from before. Yes, Mara said simply, not elaborating. Cole handed over Mrs. Fletcher's list, and Hastings began gathering items from the shelves. While he worked, Mara wandered the store, looking at bolts of fabric and jars of penny candy and tools hung on the walls. It was a well-stocked store, she'd give it that. Better than anything she'd seen in the old country. Miss Vesna, the voice made her turn. Thomas Caldwell stood in the doorway, looking exactly as he had the day he'd rejected her, perfectly dressed, perfectly groomed, perfectly sure of his own importance. Mr. Caldwell. Her voice was cool, polite, empty of emotion. I heard you'd found employment with Cole Bennett. He said it like an accusation. I hope you understand the unusual nature of that arrangement. I understand I have honest work and a roof over my head. That's more than I had when you turned me away. Caldwell's jaw tightened. I did what was best for both of us. Surely you can see that now. I see that you made a choice. I made a different one. Working as a ranch hand is hardly what you came to America for. Mara looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no regret. Just a kind of distant pity for a man so trapped by his own fear of what others might think that he'd thrown away something real in favor of something respectable. You're right, she said. I came to America for a future, and I found one. Just not the future you offered. Cole appeared at her shoulder carrying a sack of flour. We all set here? Almost done, mister. Bennett, Hastings called from the counter. Caldwell looked between them and something ugly crossed his face. I hope you know what you're doing, Cole. Bringing that kind of help onto your ranch. People talk. Let them talk. Cole's voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. Mara's worth 10 of the people doing the talking. She's done with this conversation, Mara interrupted. Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell. She walked past him without waiting for a response, and Cole followed. Behind them, Mara heard Caldwell sputter something, but she didn't turn around. At the counter, Hastings was wrapping their purchases nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in his store. That'll be $4.30, Mr. Bennett. Cole paid, and they loaded the supplies into the wagon. By the time they were ready to leave, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, watching with barely concealed interest. Give them a show? Cole asked quietly. What do you mean? Instead of answering, he offered her his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. It was a small gesture, but deliberate, the kind of courtesy a man showed a woman he respected. Mara took his hand and climbed up, settling her skirts while Cole walked around to his side. As they pulled away from the general store, Mara couldn't resist one glance back. Thomas Caldwell stood on the sidewalk watching them go, his face frozen in an expression of disbelief and something that might have been regret. "You all right?" Cole asked once they were clear of town. "Better than all right." Mara surprised herself by laughing. "I think I just won." "Won what?" "Everything. My future. My pride. My proof that I don't need what he was offering." Cole smiled. "For what it's worth, I think Thomas Caldwell is the biggest fool in Kansas, and someday he's going to realize exactly what he threw away." Something in his tone made Mara look at him. Cole was focused on the road ahead, but there was color in his cheeks that hadn't been there before. "Cole, anyway," he interrupted, "Mrs. Fletcher's going to want these supplies before she starts threatening to cook me for dinner. That woman takes her provisions seriously." Mara let it go. But as the wagon rattled toward home, toward the ranch that had somehow become home in just 2 weeks, she felt something shifting between them. Something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. But it was there, and it was growing. The ranch swallowed them back into its rhythms. Days turned into weeks, weeks into a month, and Mara found herself settling into a life she'd never imagined. She learned to love the work, the physical exhaustion of it, the satisfaction of tasks completed well, the simple pleasure of sitting down to dinner knowing she'd earned her place at the table. Mrs. Fletcher's health began to fade gradually, so subtly that at first Mara didn't notice. But one morning she found the old woman sitting at the kitchen table, breathing hard from the simple effort of coming downstairs. "Don't fuss," Mrs. Fletcher said when Mara moved to help. "I'm fine." "You're not fine." "Fine enough." But her hands were shaking as she reached for her coffee cup. Mara and Cole exchanged glances across the table. Without discussing it, they both knew. Mrs. Fletcher was dying, and she knew it too, and all they could do was make sure she wasn't alone when the end came. "I'll take over the morning work," Mara said. "You rest." "I don't need—" "Please." Mara put her hand over Mrs. Fletcher's. "Let me help." The old woman's eyes were suddenly bright with tears she refused to shed. "You're a good girl, Mara Vesna, better than this world deserves." So Mara took over more of the household work, while Cole handled the ranch with quiet efficiency. They moved around each other like partners in a dance they'd practiced for years, anticipating needs, supporting where support was needed, giving space when space was required. And through it all, that unnamed thing between them kept growing. It came to a head one evening in late summer. They'd spent the day repairing fence in the heat, and afterward, both dirty and exhausted, they'd collapsed on the porch to watch the sun set. Mrs. Fletcher was upstairs sleeping, and the prairie was settling into evening quiet. "You ever think about what comes next?" Cole asked suddenly. Mara looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He stopped, started again. "When you came here, you were planning to marry Thomas Caldwell, build a life with him. Now you're working on my ranch, and I know this isn't permanent. Eventually you'll want—" "I want this," Mara interrupted. "This ranch, this work, this—" She gestured at the endless prairie. "This life." Cole turned to face her fully. "Even though it's not what you planned?" "Plans change. People change." She met his eyes. "I've changed." "So have I," he said quietly. "Having you here, it's made me realize how much I'd let myself become just empty, going through motions, building the ranch because it was all I had left. And now? Now I'm building it because I want to, because I can imagine a future again." He paused. "A future that includes you. If that's something you might want." Mara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Cole, you don't have to answer now. I know it's complicated. I know I'm probably breaking every rule about employer and employee and propriety, and—" She kissed him. It was brief, impulsive, and completely improper. When she pulled back, Cole was staring at her like she'd just revealed she could fly. "That's my answer," Mara said. And then he was kissing her back, his hands gentle on her face, and the prairie wind whispered around them like a benediction. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "This is going to cause talk," he said. "Let them talk. The whole town's going to have opinions." Let them. He laughed, and it was the freest sound Mara had ever heard from him. You're fearless, you know that? Not fearless. Just tired of letting other people decide what my life should look like. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, neither speaking, both knowing that everything had just changed again. Tomorrow they would figure out what it meant. Tomorrow they would face whatever came next. But tonight, they just sat and watched the sky turn from blue to purple to black, while somewhere in the house, Mrs. Fletcher smiled in her sleep, knowing that the ranch she loved would be in good hands. The morning after their kiss, Mara woke to find Cole already gone from the house, his coffee cup washed and set to dry beside the sink. Through the kitchen window, she could see him working near the barn, his movements efficient and familiar. Nothing had changed in the physical world around them, but everything felt different. The air seemed charged with possibility, and Mara caught herself smiling as she kneaded bread dough, her hands working the rhythm Mrs. Fletcher had taught her. "You're humming," the old woman said from the doorway. She'd managed to come downstairs on her own, though the effort had left her breathing hard. Mara's hands stilled. "I didn't realize." "Don't stop on my account. It's nice to hear life in this house again." Mrs. Fletcher lowered herself carefully into a chair. "That boy finally tell you how he feels? How did you—" "I'm dying, not blind." Mrs. Fletcher's smile was tired but genuine. "I've been watching him watch you for weeks now. Thought he might never work up the courage." Mara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's complicated." "Love usually is. But out here, you can't afford to wait for the perfect moment. Life's too short and too hard." The old woman paused, catching her breath. "Sarah would have liked you. She would have been glad Cole found someone who sees him for who he is, not what he has." "I'm not Sarah." "No, and that's good. He doesn't need another Sarah. He needs you." Mrs. Fletcher reached for the cup of tea Mara had placed in front of her. "But you should know, this won't be easy. The town already has opinions about you working here. When they find out it's more than that—" "I know." Mara returned to her bread dough, punching it down with more force than necessary. "Let them have their opinions. That's the spirit. Just don't let Cole shoulder all of it alone. He'll try to protect you from the worst of it, and that's noble, but it'll eat him alive if you let it." They worked in companionable silence after that, Mrs. Fletcher offering occasional guidance while Mara managed the morning tasks. The old woman was teaching her everything she knew, passing down decades of knowledge with the urgency of someone running out of time. How to read the cattle for signs of disease, how to predict weather by the way the wind felt, how to make a little go a long way when supplies were low. "You're going to be the woman of this house soon," Mrs. Fletcher said quietly. "Whether it's official or not, the ranch will depend on you. I won't let it fall. I know you won't. That's why I can finally rest." Cole came in for lunch smelling of hay and horses, his shirt damp with sweat. He caught Mara's eye across the table and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, promise, a shared secret that made the ordinary meal feel like celebration. "I need to ride out to the south pasture this afternoon," he said. "Check on the new calves." "Mara, you want to come? Could use an extra pair of hands." Mrs. Fletcher made a sound that might have been amusement. "I'll be fine here. You two go on." The ride out was quiet, both of them hyper-aware of each other in ways they hadn't been before. Cole sat easy in his saddle, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining something about the land, while Mara absorbed everything, building a map of this place that was becoming hers. When they reached the south pasture, they found most of the calves healthy and thriving, their mothers watchful but calm. Cole moved among them with practiced confidence, checking each one, while Mara kept the horses steady and learned by watching. "That one there," Cole said, pointing to a calf that stood slightly apart from the others. "See how she's favoring her front left leg?" Mara nodded. "Should we bring her in?" "Let's take a closer look first." They approached slowly, Cole speaking in low, soothing tones. The mother cow watched them nervously but didn't charge. When Cole examined the calf's leg, he found a deep gash that was already showing signs of infection. "We need to get her back to the barn," he said. "Clean this properly before it gets worse." Getting the injured calf back to the ranch turned into a 2-hour ordeal. The mother followed, bellowing her distress, while other cattle grew agitated by the commotion. By the time they had the calf secured in a stall and the mother pen nearby, both Mara and Cole were exhausted and filthy. "Welcome to ranching," Cole said, wiping sweat from his forehead and leaving a streak of dirt in its place. "Glamorous, isn't it?" Mara looked down at her ruined dress, her hands scratched and dirty, her hair falling out of its pins. Then she started laughing. "Thomas Caldwell should see me now." "Thomas Caldwell's an idiot." Cole was grinning despite the exhaustion. "And I'm starting to think getting rejected by him was the best thing that ever happened to you." "Starting to think?" "Well, I'm biased. It brought you to me." They cleaned the calf's wound together, Cole showing Mara how to hold the animal steady while he applied salve and bandages. The calf fought them at first, but Mara started humming, the same lullaby she'd used on the runaway horses, and the young animal gradually calmed. "You have to teach me that song someday," Cole said. "It's just something my mother used to sing." "It's more than that. It's like you speak a language animals understand better than human words." He finished securing the bandage and stood back. "There. She should heal up fine now." As they walked back toward the house in the fading light, Cole reached for Mara's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt momentous, choosing to be seen together, choosing to claim what was growing between them even though neither had said the words yet. "People are going to know," Mara said. "The next time we go to town, let them know." Cole's grip tightened on her hand. "I spent 3 years hiding from life after Sarah died. I'm done hiding." That night at dinner, Mrs. Fletcher watched them with barely concealed satisfaction. "So we're making this official then?" Cole and Mara looked at each other. They hadn't discussed it, hadn't made any formal declarations. But sitting there at the table that had become the center of Mara's world, with the old woman who'd accepted her without question, it felt right to acknowledge the truth. "Recording," Cole said. "Properly." "About time." Mrs. Fletcher raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To my 2 favorite fools, may you be half as happy as you deserve." The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt both new and ancient. Mara and Cole worked the ranch together during the day, learning each other's rhythms, building something that was more than employer and employee, but not yet defined by any formal commitment. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked about everything: their pasts, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for what the ranch could become. "I want to expand the herd," Cole said one night. "Build this into something that can support not just us, but employees. Make it a real operation." "How many acres do you have?" 320. "It's enough for what I'm planning, if we manage it right." He pulled out a piece of paper covered in sketches and numbers. "See, if we rotate the pastures properly, improve the water situation, maybe add another barn for winter shelter." Mara studied his plans with interest. She could see the vision taking shape, the careful thought he'd put into every detail. "This would take years." "I know, but we have years." He looked at her. "At least I hope we do." "We do," Mara said softly. Mrs. Fletcher's health continued to decline, but she remained stubbornly present, refusing to take to her bed even when the effort of coming downstairs clearly cost her. She taught Mara her recipes, her methods, her accumulated wisdom about running a ranch household. And she told stories about Sarah, about the early days of the ranch, about her own long and difficult life. "I came to this country with nothing," she said one afternoon while Mara helped her shell peas. "Younger than you, alone, scared out of my mind. Spent 20 years as a servant before I ever felt like I had any control over my own life. And you know what the difference was?" "What?" "I stopped waiting for permission to be myself. Stopped apologizing for my accent, my background, my history. Just decided I was going to be who I was and let people deal with it." Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, worked steadily. "You already know that. You know. You knew it the day you told Thomas Caldwell to go to hell." "I didn't tell him to go to hell." "You did with your eyes. I heard about it." Mrs. Fletcher smiled. "Whole town heard about it, and they've been reassessing you ever since." It was true. The second time Mara and Cole went to town together, the reception was noticeably different. People still stared, still whispered, but there was less hostility and more curiosity. When they walked into the general store hand in hand, Mr. Hastings actually smiled. "Miss Vesna, Mr. Bennett, good to see you both." "We need supplies," Cole said, handing over another list. While Hastings gathered their order, several townspeople found excuses to come into the store. Mara recognized some of them: the woman who ran the dress shop, the hotel manager, a few ranchers from neighboring properties. They nodded to Cole, and some even nodded to Mara, though their expressions were carefully neutral. Then Thomas Caldwell walked in. The store went silent. Caldwell stopped short when he saw them, his face cycling through surprise, displeasure, and something that might have been embarrassment. He'd clearly expected to conduct his business without encountering them. "Thomas," Cole said evenly. "Cole, Miss Vesna." Caldwell's voice was stiff. "I heard you two were—" He stopped, seeming to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Were what?" Mara asked. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Spending considerable time together." "We work together, and we're courting. Is that what you came in here to confirm?" Someone in the back of the store made a choking sound. Caldwell's face went red. "I came for tobacco. What you choose to do is your own business." "Yes," Mara said. "It is." Cole's hand found hers again, and they stood there united while Caldwell conducted his purchase with stiff dignity and left without another word. After the door closed behind him, the store erupted in whispers. "Well," Mr. Hastings said into the noise, "that was illuminating. Your total is $5.70, Mr. Bennett." On the ride home, Cole was quiet. Mara could feel tension radiating from him. "What's wrong?" "I don't like that people talk about you, about us." "They're going to talk regardless." Mara shifted closer to him on the wagon seat. "Would you rather we hide?" "No, but I don't want you to suffer for being with me." "Cole, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "I crossed an ocean to come here. I was rejected by a man who promised me a future. I was turned away from every job I applied for because of how I sound when I speak. Do you really think some gossip from people who don't matter is going to hurt me?" A slow smile spread across his face. "When you put it that way, the only opinions I care about are yours, Mrs. Fletcher's, and my own. Everyone else can think what they want. You're extraordinary, you know that? I'm stubborn. There's a difference." "I don't think there is." That night, Cole asked her something he'd been holding back. They were on the porch again, watching fireflies appear in the gathering darkness, and his voice was careful when he spoke. "Do you ever regret it? Coming to America?" Mara considered the question seriously. "I regret nothing. Even the hard parts brought me here. To this porch. This ranch. This life." She paused. "Do you ever regret Sarah?" He finished the question for her. "No. She was part of my life, and I loved her, and losing her nearly destroyed me. But she's gone, and you're here, and those are just facts. What I'd regret is letting fear keep me from building something new." "Is that what this is? Something new?" Cole turned to face her fully. The last light was fading from the sky, and in the dimness his features were soft, open, vulnerable. "I love you, Mara Vesna. I know it's fast and I know it's complicated, but I love you. And I want you to stay. Not as my employee, not as my housekeeper, as my partner, my wife, if you'll have me." Mara's breath caught. "Cole? You don't have to answer now. I just needed you to know. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and I don't care what anyone else thinks about it." She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't quite say into the gesture. When they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, "Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it." Cole laughed, the sound bright with joy and relief, and pulled her close. They sat wrapped in each other's arms while the prairie night settled around them, and somewhere in the house Mrs. Fletcher smiled and closed her eyes, content that the future was settled. The engagement changed nothing and everything. They still worked the ranch together, still shared meals and chores and long conversations. But now there was purpose behind it all, a sense of building towards something permanent. They decided on a simple wedding in 6 weeks, time enough to make arrangements, but not so long that waiting became torture. Mrs. Fletcher threw herself into planning with energy that belied her failing health. She insisted on baking the cake herself, on altering Sarah's wedding dress to fit Mara, on making sure every detail was perfect. "This is my last party," she said when Mara protested that she was doing too much. Let me enjoy it. 3 weeks before the wedding, they went to town to post the announcement and pick up fabric for Mara's dress alterations. The general store was crowded that day, and when they walked in, conversation stuttered and stopped. Mr. Hastings cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett, Miss Vesna, congratulations on your engagement. The whole town's talking about it. Thank you, Cole said carefully. An older woman Mara didn't recognize stepped forward. She had iron gray hair and the bearing of someone used to being listened to. I'm Margaret Sullivan. I run the church social committee. Mara braced herself for criticism. We'd like to host a reception for you after the wedding, Mrs. Sullivan continued. Nothing fancy, just cake and refreshments at the church hall, if you'd be amenable. Mara looked at Cole, who looked equally surprised. That's very kind, he said. Not kind. Right. Mrs. Sullivan's gaze moved to Mara. We didn't treat you fairly when you first arrived, Miss Vesna. Some of us are hoping to make amends. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. Mara felt a knot she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to loosen. Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. We'd be honored. The woman nodded briskly. Good. We'll speak more after the ceremony. Now, I believe you came for fabric. Word of the town's gesture spread quickly. Over the next few days, gifts began arriving at the ranch. A set of dish towels from the dress shop owner, a coffee grinder from the hotel manager, a hand-carved picture frame from the barber. Each one was a small peace offering, an acknowledgement that perhaps they'd been wrong. They're trying, Mrs. Fletcher said, examining a jar of preserves that had appeared on the porch. It's not everything, but it's a start. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Thomas Caldwell made his displeasure known by pointedly ignoring them when they crossed paths on the street. A few of the more conservative townspeople muttered about propriety and foreigners and the decline of proper standards. But they were in the minority, and their disapproval meant nothing against the growing acceptance. 2 weeks before the wedding, catastrophe struck. Mara woke in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of Cole shouting. She ran downstairs to find him pulling on his boots, his face grim. Fences down on the east pasture. Cattle are loose. How many? Don't know yet. Could be the whole herd. He grabbed his hat. I need to round them up before they scatter too far. I'm coming with you. They rode out in darkness, following the sound of lowing cattle and the trail of destruction. The fence wasn't just down. It was destroyed. Posts snapped and wire tangled like something had hit it with enormous force. And through the gap, dozens of cattle were wandering freely, some already a mile away from where they should be. Cole swore under his breath. This is going to take all day. Maybe longer. Then we'd better start. What followed was the hardest physical labor Mara had ever endured. They worked from first light until well past dark, riding hard, shouting until their voices went hoarse, using every trick Cole knew to turn the scattered cattle back toward home. Some came easily, others fought them, running wild-eyed into ravines and thick brush where horses couldn't follow. By the time they got the last stray back through a hastily repaired section of fence, both of them were exhausted, filthy, and sunburned. Mara's legs were so sore she could barely dismount. Her dress was torn in 3 places, her hands were raw from handling rope, and she was fairly certain she'd never been this tired in her life. Cole looked worse. He was limping from where a cow had kicked him, and there was a gash on his forearm that was still bleeding sluggishly. Let me see that, Mara said. It's fine. It's not fine. Sit down. They were in the barn, the last of the cattle secured in the pens. Cole sat heavily on a hay bale while Mara fetched water and cloth. The wound was deep but clean, and she bandaged it with steady hands despite her exhaustion. 23 head, Cole said quietly. That's how many got out. We got back 21. The other 2? One broke its leg in a ravine, had to put it down. The other, I don't know, could be anywhere by now. Mara heard what he wasn't saying. Those 2 cattle represented a significant loss, both in immediate value and in breeding potential. The ranch couldn't afford many losses like that. We'll find the other one tomorrow, she said. And if we don't? Then we keep looking. She finished tying off the bandage. Cole, this isn't the end. It's a setback. It's more than a setback. He stopped, running his good hand through his hair. I'm supposed to be building something here. Something stable. Something worthy of... of you. And instead, I'm losing cattle and breaking fences and... Stop. Mara knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. You think I came here for a perfect life? For easy success and no problems? No, but I came here because I saw a man willing to fight for what he believed in. Someone who didn't quit when life got hard. That's who you are, Cole Bennett. Not someone who has all the answers, but someone who keeps trying even when the answers don't come. She gripped his hands. We're going to fix this. Together. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. And I deserve you. And we deserve the life we're building, even if we have to build it from broken fences and lost cattle and sheer stubbornness. They sat together in the quiet barn, surrounded by the familiar sounds of animals settling for the night, and drew strength from each other. Later, they would find out that the fence had been deliberately sabotaged. Someone with a grudge had cut it in the night. Later still, they would discover it was Thomas Caldwell's doing, one last petty attempt to punish Mara for choosing Cole over him. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that they were together, and they were determined, and the ranch was still standing. Mrs. Fletcher was waiting when they finally stumbled into the house well past midnight. She took one look at them and pointed toward chairs. Sit, both of you. She heated soup and made them eat, even though they protested they were too tired. She rebandaged Cole's arm properly and put salve on Mara's rope-burned hands. And when they'd finished eating, she spoke with the blunt honesty they'd come to expect from her. This is what it means to ranch. Crisis and recovery and crisis again. The question isn't whether hard things will happen. The question is whether you'll quit when they do. We're not quitting, Mara said. Good, because I didn't raise quitters, and I'm not about to watch you two give up now. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes were fierce despite her frailty. You're going to get married in 10 days? You're going to celebrate that marriage properly, and then you're going to come back here and fix whatever needs fixing. Understood? Yes, ma'am, they said in unison. The old woman smiled. That's better. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day of work. They found the missing cow 3 days later, calmly grazing in a neighbor's pasture. The neighbor, a gruff man named Harrison, helped them load the animal and then surprised them both by speaking. Heard about your fence trouble. Also heard it wasn't an accident. Cole's jaw tightened. You heard right. Caldwell's a vindictive fool, but he's also a coward. He won't try anything else now that people know what he did. Harrison spat in the dust. For what it's worth, most of us are glad you're marrying Miss Vesna. Girl's got spine. We could use more people like that out here. It was the most words Harrison had strung together in anyone's memory, and both Cole and Mara were too surprised to respond immediately. Thank you, Mara finally managed. Harrison nodded and walked away, and they drove the recovered cow home feeling lighter than they had in days. The wedding took place on a Sunday morning in early autumn, when the prairie grass had turned golden and the air carried the first hint of coming cold. Mara wore Sarah's altered dress, white linen with simple lace at the collar, and felt no awkwardness in it. Sarah had been part of Cole's past, part of building this ranch, and wearing her dress felt like honoring that rather than replacing it. Mrs. Fletcher had made it downstairs for the ceremony, though the effort left her pale and shaking. She sat in the front row of the small church, beaming with pride, while nearly the whole town crowded in behind her. The ceremony was brief and simple. Cole's voice was steady when he said his vows, and Mara's hands didn't shake when she said hers. And when the pastor pronounced them married, the applause that rose from the assembled townspeople was genuine and warm. At the reception in the church hall, people who'd ignored Mara months ago now lined up to wish her well. Mrs. Sullivan had organized everything beautifully. Tables laden with food, a cake that rivaled anything Mara had seen in the old country, and genuine kindness from nearly everyone present. Thomas Caldwell did not attend. His loss, Mrs. Fletcher said when someone mentioned his absence. That man's going to die alone and bitter, and he'll have no one to blame but himself. Late in the afternoon, when the celebration was winding down and the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, Cole pulled Mara aside. Want to escape? Desperately. They slipped away while Mrs. Sullivan was cutting more cake, riding back to the ranch in the wagon with the last light painting everything gold. The house waited for them, familiar and welcoming, and when they walked through the door, Mara felt something settle in her chest. This was home. Not the country she'd left behind, not the life Thomas Caldwell had promised. This simple ranch house with its worn furniture and patched curtains and history written into every board. "Welcome home, Mrs. Bennett," Cole said softly. Mara smiled. The name fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Mrs. Fletcher passed away 3 weeks after the wedding, in her sleep, with such peace on her face that Mara almost didn't realize at first. She'd gone upstairs to wake the old woman for breakfast and found her lying still beneath the quilt she'd stitched 40 years ago, her hands folded across her chest as if she'd arranged herself deliberately for this final rest. Mara stood in the doorway for a long moment, tears streaming silently down her face before going to find Cole. He was in the barn, and when she told him, his face crumpled briefly before he mastered himself. They held each other in the dusty morning light, mourning the woman who'd been the heart of the ranch for so long. "She waited," Cole said finally. "She stayed long enough to see us married, to know the ranch would be cared for. And then she let go." They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree she'd always loved. Half the town came to the funeral, and even people who'd never met Mrs. Fletcher brought food and condolences because that's what you did in a place this small. The grave was simple, just her name, her years, and beneath it the words, "She never quit," because Cole said that was what she would have wanted. After everyone left, Mara and Cole stood by the fresh grave in silence. "The house is going to feel empty," Mara said. "It already does." Cole took her hand. "But she taught you everything she knew. The ranch won't forget her." That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She walked through the house in darkness, touching things that had been Mrs. Fletcher's, the coffee pot she'd used every morning, the chair where she'd sat to shell peas, the apron hanging by the stove. Each object held a memory, a lesson, a moment of the old woman's fierce kindness. In the kitchen, Mara found Mrs. Fletcher's recipe book, its pages stained and worn from decades of use. Tucked in the front was a folded piece of paper with Mara's name on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Mara, you came to this ranch a stranger and became the daughter I never had. Don't let anyone make you small. Don't apologize for who you are. And when times get hard, remember that strength isn't never falling down. It's getting back up every single time. Take care of my boy. Take care of this land. Make it yours. E.F." Mara pressed the letter to her chest and wept quietly, careful not to wake Cole. The grief was sharp but clean, without regret. Mrs. Fletcher had given her everything she could and then slipped away knowing her legacy was secure. The weeks that followed were an education in loneliness and partnership. The house felt cavernous without Mrs. Fletcher's presence, but Mara threw herself into filling that emptiness with work. She took over all the household management, learning through trial and error what the old woman had made look effortless. She burned bread, oversalted soup, scorched 3 shirts while learning to work the iron properly. But she also succeeded, planting a late garden, organizing the pantry, making the house run smoothly while still helping Cole with the outdoor work. "You're doing too much," Cole said one evening, finding her mending harnesses by lamplight when she should have been sleeping. "There's too much to do." "Then we hire help. Mara, you don't have to prove anything. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to keep this ranch running." She set down the harness. "We lost cattle in the fence break. We lost time. We can't afford to lose momentum now." Cole pulled up a chair beside her. "My father worked himself to death trying to keep his farm. I watched him destroy his health, his happiness, everything, because he thought the only way to succeed was to never stop working. And in the end, the bank took it anyway. This is different, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm watching my wife turn herself inside out trying to be everything to everyone, and I'm scared I'm going to lose you the same way I lost him." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Mara set down her mending and looked at him, really looked. He was tired, too. The past month had aged him, carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "I want you to remember we're partners. That means I carry some of this weight too. It means we figure out together what's essential and what can wait. He took her hands. Mrs. Fletcher ran this house alone for 3 years because I was too grief-stricken to help. I'm not making that mistake again. Tell me what you need. So Mara did. She told him about the overwhelming feeling of trying to fill an unfillable space, about feeling like she had to earn her place every single day, about the fear that if she slowed down, if she admitted she couldn't do everything, people would say Thomas Caldwell had been right to reject her. Cole listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said simply, "Thomas Caldwell is a fool, and his opinion stopped mattering the day you walked away from him. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all to ghosts and idiots." Despite everything, Mara laughed. "When did you get so wise?" "About 3 minutes ago. I'm making this up as I go." He pulled her to her feet. "Come on. We're going to bed, and tomorrow we're making a list of what actually needs doing versus what we think should be done. And then we're going to be smart about this." They were. The next morning, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee and paper and worked through everything systematically. Some tasks were essential: feeding cattle, maintaining equipment, managing finances. Others were important but not urgent: expanding the herd, improving the house, building new structures. And some things, they admitted, were nice ideas that could wait indefinitely. "We need help," Mara said, looking at the list, "at least during busy seasons." "Agreed. I'll ask around in town, see if anyone knows a reliable hand looking for work. And I need to learn more about the business side, the accounts, the cattle prices, the contracts." Cole looked surprised. "You want to handle that?" "I want to understand it. This ranch is half mine now. I should know how it operates beyond just the daily work." So he taught her. In the evenings, after the day's labor was done, they sat together going through ledgers and market reports. Mara learned how cattle were bought and sold, how to read fluctuations in prices, how to calculate feed costs and profit margins. She had a head for numbers that surprised them both, and within a month she'd reorganized their record-keeping system to be clearer and more efficient. "Where did you learn to do this?" Cole asked, studying her neat columns and precise calculations. "My father kept books for the estate where he worked. Sometimes I helped him." She tapped the ledger. "Numbers don't lie, and they don't care about accents. I like that." Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the north with brutal cold and snow that buried fences and made simple tasks dangerous. They lost 2 cattle to the cold despite their best efforts, and one brutal morning Cole came back from checking the herd with his hands so frozen he couldn't feel them. Mara had to warm them slowly in lukewarm water while he gritted his teeth against the pain of returning sensation. "This is insane," she said. "You could lose fingers doing this. Cattle need checking regardless of weather. Then we need a better system, a shelter closer to the north pasture, something." They spent the worst of the winter planning improvements, sketching ideas on paper, calculating costs, dreaming of what they could build when spring came. It helped pass the long, dark evenings, gave them something to focus on besides the howling wind and the endless cold. One night in January, Mara woke to find Cole's side of the bed empty. She found him standing at the window, looking out at the snow-covered prairie lit by a full moon. "Can't sleep?" she asked, thinking about Sarah. It was the first time he'd mentioned his first wife since the wedding, and Mara felt her chest tighten. "Tell me about her." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "She was quiet, thoughtful. She loved this land more than I did at first. She's the one who convinced me to file the claim, to build here instead of somewhere easier. She could see what it could become when all I saw was work." "Do you miss her?" "Every day, but not the way I did at first." He turned to Mara. "At first, missing her was like missing a limb. Everything I did reminded me she wasn't there to do it with me. But now it's gentler. I can remember the good parts without the grief crushing me." "Do you ever feel guilty? About me?" "No." His answer was immediate and certain. "Sarah would have liked you. She would have been glad I didn't spend the rest of my life alone. And I think she would have appreciated that you're not trying to be her." Mara moved to stand beside him at the window. "I can never be her." "I don't want you to be. I want you to be exactly who you are." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You know what the difference is between you and Sarah? What? Sarah dreamed about this ranch. You're building it with your own hands. She saw the potential. You're making it real. The words settled something in Mara that she hadn't known was unsettled. She leaned against him, and they watched the moonlit prairie together until the cold drove them back to bed. Spring came late but triumphant, turning the brown grass green almost overnight and filling the air with the smell of wet earth and new growth. Mara discovered she was pregnant in April, on a morning when the nausea she'd been fighting for weeks finally made sense. She told Cole that evening while they were working in the garden she'd planted. He was turning soil while she marked out rows, and when she spoke the words, his hands went still on the shovel. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor." He dropped the shovel and pulled her into his arms, laughing with pure joy. "A baby! We're having a baby!" "We're having a baby," Mara confirmed, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This ranch, this man, this child growing inside her. This was the future she'd crossed an ocean to find. But pregnancy on a working ranch was no gentle experience. Mara pushed through morning sickness to feed chickens, fought exhaustion to help with spring branding, worked through back pain to keep the household running. Cole tried to make her rest, but there was too much work and not enough hands. "We're hiring help," he announced one morning. "I don't care what it costs. You're not doing this alone." They found a young man named Sam Turner who was eager to learn ranching and willing to work hard for room, board, and a small wage. He was 18, gangly, and enthusiastic in a way that reminded Mara of a puppy. But he was strong and reliable, and having another set of hands made everything easier. Sam treated Mara with awkward respect, clearly unsure how to interact with a ranch owner who was both foreign and pregnant. But he watched everything she did with animals and tried to copy her techniques. "How do you make them calm like that?" he asked one day, watching her gentle and nervous horse. "I sing to them. In that language of yours?" "Sometimes. Sometimes just humming works. Animals respond to tone more than words." Sam tried humming tunelessly, and the horse snorted and stepped away. Mara laughed despite herself. "Maybe stick to the physical work for now," she suggested gently. As Mara's pregnancy progressed, the town's attitude toward her continued to evolve. Women who'd been coolly polite became warmer, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Mrs. Sullivan organized a gathering at the church hall where townswomen brought gifts and shared stories of their own pregnancies and births. "You're one of us now," Mrs. Sullivan said simply. "Whether you started here or not doesn't matter anymore." But acceptance wasn't universal. One hot day in July, heavily pregnant and exhausted from helping Cole repair a barn door, Mara went to town for supplies and encountered Thomas Caldwell on the street. He'd aged poorly in the year since their wedding. His face was drawn, his clothes less perfectly pressed. Rumors said his banking business was struggling, that he'd made poor investments and alienated key clients. "Mara," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice. She stopped, one hand on her swollen belly. "Thomas, I heard about—" He gestured vaguely at her pregnancy. "Congratulations." "Thank you. I also heard the ranch is doing well, that you've expanded the herd, hired help, that you're making it into something." "We're trying." He stepped closer, and she saw something broken in his eyes. "I made a mistake. When you first arrived, I should have— if I'd just given you a chance—" "Stop." Mara's voice was firm. "Whatever you're about to say, don't." "But you made a choice, Thomas. You looked at me and decided I wasn't good enough because of how I sounded. And now you see me pregnant and successful and accepted by the town, and you think you made a mistake. But you didn't make a mistake. You revealed who you are." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You wanted a wife who would make you look good. Someone who fit your idea of proper and American and acceptable. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a decoration." Mara met his eyes steadily. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Because you rejecting me led me to Cole, to the ranch, to a life I actually want. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you for being exactly who you are." She walked away, leaving him standing in the street, and didn't look back. Later, she would learn that he left Willow Ridge 6 months after that conversation, moving back east and disappearing from their lives entirely. But in that moment, she simply felt free. Free from the last ghost of who she'd thought she needed to be. Labor came in late September, on a day when the sky was impossibly blue and the air smelled of harvest. Mara's water broke while she was hanging laundry, and the first contractions hit so hard they drove her to her knees. Cole found her there and went pale. "I'm getting the doctor." "There's no time." "Mara, get Mrs. Sullivan, and Sam can ride for the doctor, but Cole, there's no time." She was right. Mrs. Sullivan arrived within 20 minutes, took one look at Mara, and started barking orders. She sent Sam for hot water and clean linens, pushed Cole out of the bedroom despite his protests, and settled in to help Mara through what turned out to be a fast, fierce labor. "You're strong," Mrs. Sullivan said, gripping Mara's hand through a contraction. "You're going to do this." "I can't." "You can. You stopped runaway horses. You survived losing everything and starting over. You built a ranch and a life from nothing. You can do this." The pain was beyond anything Mara had imagined, wave after wave, until she thought she might break apart. But between contractions, she thought of Mrs. Fletcher's letter. Strength isn't never falling down. It's getting back up every time. And she found the will to keep going. The baby was born just as the doctor arrived, entering the world with a furious wail that made everyone laugh with relief. A daughter, red-faced and perfect, with a cap of dark hair in her father's eyes. Cole was allowed back in to find Mara exhausted but glowing, their daughter wrapped in a quilt Mrs. Sullivan had brought. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "She's loud," Mara said, but she was smiling. They named her Ellen, after Mrs. Fletcher, and Sarah for Cole's first wife. Ellen Sarah Bennett, a name that honored the past while reaching toward the future. The first months of Ellen's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human alive. Mara learned to do everything one-handed, cooking, cleaning, even helping with light ranch work, while carrying the baby. Ellen seemed to have inherited her mother's lungs and her father's stubborn determination, and she made her needs known at impressive volume. "She's going to run this ranch someday," Sam predicted, watching the baby scream her displeasure at being set down for even a moment. "She's going to run the whole county," Cole corrected, and the pride in his voice made Mara's chest ache with happiness. Winter came again, and this time they were better prepared. The shelter they'd planned was built, the cattle were stronger, and they had Sam to help shoulder the burden. On the coldest nights, they brought Ellen's cradle into their bedroom and lay awake listening to her breathe, marveling that they'd created this small, perfect person. One night, with Ellen asleep between them and wind howling outside, Cole said quietly, "Do you ever think about your sister, your family back in the old country?" Mara hadn't spoken of them in months, but she thought of them often. Every day. "I wonder if my sister's children are grown now, if she still lives in the same house, if she thinks about me. Do you want to write to her? Let her know about Ellen?" "I don't know if the letters would reach her, and I don't know what I'd say. How do you explain a whole life in a letter?" Mara touched Ellen's soft hair. "But maybe I'll try." She did write, eventually. A long letter telling her sister about the journey to America, about Thomas Caldwell's rejection, about stopping runaway horses and falling in love and building a ranch from nothing, about Ellen, about the prairie, about finding home in the last place she'd expected. She never received a reply, but writing the letter felt like completing something, like honoring the person she'd been while celebrating who she'd become. Spring brought new calves and new challenges. One of the cows had complications giving birth, and despite everything Cole and Mara tried, both the cow and calf died. It was a hard loss, both emotionally and financially, and Cole took it badly. "This is why ranching breaks people," he said, standing over the dead animals. "You do everything right, and it still doesn't matter." "So we try again." Mara shifted Ellen to her other hip. "What else can we do?" "We could sell, move to town. I could get work that doesn't depend on weather and luck, and 1,000 things we can't control." "Is that what you want?" Cole looked at the land spreading around them, the grass greening in the spring sun, the cattle grazing peacefully, the house they'd built and rebuilt and filled with life. "No, but I don't want to fail you and Ellen either." "You're not failing us. You're teaching us that worthwhile things are hard. That success isn't about never having setbacks. It's about having more successes than failures. Mara touched his arm. We're going to lose cattle. We're going to have bad years, but we're also going to have good years. And we're building something that will outlast us both. He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them. How did I get so lucky? You offered a job to a desperate woman with a foreign accent. That's not luck. That's wisdom. They hired more help that summer, a married couple, the Hendersons, who'd been farming but wanted to try ranching. Martha Henderson became Mara's right hand, helping with Ellen and the household while learning ranch management. Her husband Jack worked with Cole and Sam, and suddenly the ranch felt less like two people struggling to do too much and more like a real operation with a team. This is what Sarah wanted, Cole said one evening, watching Jack and Sam work together to move cattle while Martha and Mara prepared dinner with Ellen playing at their feet. A ranch that was big enough to support multiple families, a real business. Then we're building her dream too, Mara said. Ellen's first birthday came on a golden September day. Half the town came to celebrate, bringing gifts and food and stories. The ranch house overflowed with people, and Mara stood in the middle of it all, her daughter on her hip, and felt the weight of how far she'd come. 2 years ago, she'd stepped off a train into rejection and uncertainty. Now she stood in a house filled with friends, on land she and Cole were building into something permanent, with a daughter who would never know what it meant to be called foreign or unwanted. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Ellen was asleep, Mara and Cole walked to Mrs. Fletcher's grave. They'd planted flowers there in the spring, and they were still blooming despite the approaching autumn. We did it, Cole said quietly. We kept the ranch going. We built it into something she'd be proud of. Mara knelt and touched the headstone. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for believing I could do this. The wind whispered through the cottonwood tree, and Mara could almost hear Mrs. Fletcher's voice. I never doubted you for a moment, girl. They walked back to the house hand in hand toward the warm lights and the life they'd built, and Mara felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. This was home. This was family. This was everything she'd crossed an ocean to find, even when she hadn't known she was looking for it. The years that followed Ellen's first birthday brought both triumph and trial in measures Mara had learned to expect from prairie life. The ranch grew steadily. More cattle, better breeding stock, a reputation for quality that spread beyond Willow Ridge to buyers in Kansas City and even Chicago. Cole's careful management and Mara's sharp eye for numbers turned what had been a struggling operation into something genuinely profitable. But profit came with a price measured in endless work and constant vigilance. The drought started in Ellen's third summer, subtle at first, just a few weeks without rain, nothing alarming in a climate where weather was always unpredictable. But weeks became months, and the grass that should have been green and abundant turned brown and brittle. The creek that ran through their property slowed to a trickle, then dried up entirely. We need to sell off some of the herd, Cole said one August morning, standing at the window, watching dust devils dance across the parched land. We don't have enough water or feed to keep everyone through winter if this doesn't break. Mara was at the table going through their accounts, Ellen coloring beside her with precious scraps of paper. The numbers told the same story Cole's instincts did. They were heading toward crisis. How many? She asked. 40 head, maybe 50. He turned from the window and Mara saw the defeat in his face. It's going to hurt. We've spent 3 years building this herd and now we're going to survive, Mara interrupted firmly. We'll sell the cattle we need to sell. We'll get through this drought the same way we got through everything else, together. But even as she said it, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. They'd weathered hard times before, but this felt different. This felt like the land itself was turning against them. The cattle sale was brutal. Prices were down because everyone was selling, everyone desperate to reduce their herds before winter came. Cole got less than half what the animals were worth, and Mara watched him age 10 years in the single afternoon it took to complete the transaction. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands while Mara counted the money they'd made. It's not enough, he said. Even with this, we're going to struggle to buy feed for the remaining cattle. And if the drought continues into next year, then we'll figure out next year when it comes. Mara set down the money and moved to stand behind him, her hands on his shoulders. Cole, listen to me. We are not going to lose this ranch. I didn't cross an ocean and survive everything I survived to let a dry summer take it from us. It's not just a dry summer, it's the worst drought in 20 years according to the old-timers, and it's not breaking. Then we adapt. We dig a deeper well. We find other sources of water. There is no other water, Mara. The whole region is drying up. The railroad's talking about bringing water in by train just to keep the towns going. His voice cracked. I don't know how to fight this. Ellen, who'd been playing quietly in the corner, came over and climbed into her father's lap. She was 3 years old and perceptive beyond her years, and she touched Cole's face with small hands. Don't be sad, Papa. Mama will fix it. Despite everything, Cole laughed, a broken, desperate sound that was half sob. Mama can't make it rain, little one. No, Mara said slowly, an idea forming. But maybe I can find water where we're not looking. She'd been reading everything she could about ranching, borrowing books from the town library, corresponding with agricultural colleges. And she'd read something about water witching, the old practice of using divining rods to locate underground water sources. Most people dismissed it as superstition, but in the book she'd read, a farmer in Nebraska had found water during a drought using the technique when conventional well digging had failed. You're talking about witching, Cole said when she explained. Mara, that's desperate? Yes. Unlikely? Probably. But what do we have to lose by trying? So Mara found a man in the next county who was known for water witching, an ancient farmer named Ezekiel Stone, who'd been finding water for 50 years. He was skeptical when she first approached him. Most people don't believe until they're desperate, he said, studying her with eyes like chips of flint. You desperate, Mrs. Bennett. Yes? Good. Desperation makes people honest. He picked up his divining rods, 2 L-shaped pieces of wire that looked impossibly simple. Let's see what your land has to say. They walked the ranch for 3 days, Ezekiel moving slowly with his rods held loosely in his gnarled hands. Cole watched from a distance, clearly unconvinced but willing to let Mara try. Sam and the Hendersons watched too, curious and skeptical in equal measure. On the 3rd day, near the eastern boundary of their property, in a spot no one had ever thought to drill, Ezekiel's rods suddenly crossed. Here, he said simply. 40 feet down, maybe 50. Good flow. You're certain? Mara asked. As certain as I ever am. But the only way to know is to dig. Digging a well 40 feet deep was expensive and exhausting. They hired a crew with the last of their reserves from the cattle sale, and for 2 weeks, men sweated and cursed and pulled dirt from the earth, while Mara prayed to anything that might listen that Ezekiel Stone wasn't a fraud. At 38 feet, the drill hit water. It came up cool and clear, flowing faster than anyone expected, and the cheer that went up from the workers made Ellen clap her hands in delight. Cole stood staring at the water with an expression caught between disbelief and overwhelming relief. You did it, he said to Mara. You actually did it. Ezekiel did it. No, you believed it could be done. You were willing to try something everyone else said was foolish. He pulled her close. You saved us. Again. The well changed everything. They could water the remaining herd, could keep the household running, could even irrigate a small garden. Other ranchers heard about their success and came asking for Ezekiel Stone's contact information. Some were grateful. Others were resentful that a foreign woman had thought of something they hadn't. Let them be resentful, Martha Henderson said one afternoon while they worked together preserving what vegetables the garden had produced. You did what needed doing. That's what matters. But Mara was learning that success often bred its own complications. 2 ranchers from south of town, the Morrison brothers, who'd always been hostile to Cole's operation, began spreading rumors that the Bennetts had used dark magic to find water, that Mara's foreign ways included witchcraft and unnatural practices. It's absurd, Cole said when the rumors reached them. Water witching has been done for generations. By Americans, Mara pointed out. When I do it, it's suddenly suspicious. The rumors might have stayed just talk if the drought hadn't broken that autumn with violent, punishing storms. Rain fell in torrents, turning the parched earth into thick mud, flooding creeks that had been dry for months. and in the chaos of one particularly vicious storm, the Morrison brothers lost a barn to lightning and 3 cattle to flooding. They blamed Mara. "She called up that storm," Frank Morrison declared in town, his face red with anger and alcohol. "Used her foreign magic to punish us for speaking truth about her." Most people dismissed it as the ranting of a man looking for someone to blame for his bad luck. But some listened, and Mara felt the old familiar weight of being judged, of being seen as other, as dangerous, as wrong. "We should confront them," Cole said, furious when he heard what was being said. "No." Mara was nursing their second child, a son they'd named James, born just 3 months earlier. Confronting them gives their words power. We ignore it and let our actions speak. But ignoring hatred didn't make it disappear. The Morrisons continued their campaign of whispers and accusations, and gradually, some of the acceptance Mara had won began to erode. People who'd been friendly became distant. The warm greetings she'd grown used to in town turned back into careful neutrality. Ellen, now 4 and starting to understand the adult world around her, came home from playing with the Henderson children one day, with tears in her eyes. "The Morrison boy said our mama is a witch," she told Cole. "He said she makes bad things happen." Cole's face went dark with rage. "Ellen, your mama is the bravest, strongest person I know, and people who say bad things about her are just scared of anyone who's different from them." "But why are they scared?" It was Mara who answered. "Because, little one, I came from far away, and I sound different, and I do things they don't understand, and instead of trying to understand, they make up stories that make me the villain. That's not fair." "No, it's not. But life isn't always fair. What matters is that we know the truth." The situation came to a head one October morning when Mara went to town for supplies and found the general store door locked despite it being business hours. Through the window, she could see Mr. Hastings inside, and when she knocked, he came to the door but didn't open it. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett," he said through the glass, "but I can't serve you anymore." Mara's chest went cold. "Why not?" "The Morrisons and their friends, they're saying if I keep doing business with you, they'll take their trade elsewhere, and I can't afford to lose that many customers." "So you're choosing them over me?" Hastings had the grace to look ashamed. "I have a family to feed. I'm sorry." Mara walked away with her head high and her hands shaking. She managed to get supplies from the feed store. The owner there was less concerned with rumors, but the ride home felt longer than it ever had before. Cole found her that evening sitting on the porch after Ellen and James were asleep, staring out at the prairie with dry eyes. "I heard what happened in town," he said quietly. "Of course you did. Everyone's heard by now." He sat beside her. "We could leave. Sell the ranch. Move somewhere no one knows us. Start fresh." Mara turned to look at him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to be happy. I want our children to grow up somewhere they're not called names because their mother has an accent. If we run now, we'll run forever. There will always be people like the Morrisons, people who need someone to blame, someone to fear, someone to make smaller so they can feel bigger." Mara took his hand. "Mrs. Fletcher told me once that the question isn't whether hard things will happen. It's whether we'll quit when they do." "You're not thinking about quitting." "Not even a little bit." The steel in her voice surprised them both. "I'm thinking about fighting back. But not with words or confrontations, with success. With proving that everything they say about me is a lie told by small, frightened people." The plan formed over the next few weeks. If the general store wouldn't serve them, they'd order supplies by railroad from Kansas City. If townspeople wanted to whisper and judge, let them. Mara and Cole would focus on building the ranch into something undeniable. They expanded the herd again, invested in better breeding stock, improved their facilities until the Bennett Ranch was clearly the most well-run operation in the county. And Mara started helping other ranchers. When the Hendersons' daughter got sick, Mara sat with her through 3 fever-racked nights, using remedies her mother had taught her. When a neighboring ranch lost their cook, Mara sent over food until they could find a replacement. When Sam decided he wanted to start his own small operation, Mara and Cole helped him secure land and gave him breeding cattle at cost. "You're being too generous," Cole said, watching Mara pack food for yet another neighbor in need. "I'm being strategic. The Morrisons want people to fear me. I want people to need me, to see that what I do helps more than it hurts." She looked up from her packing. You can't sustain hatred when someone keeps doing you kindnesses. It works slowly, one act at a time. The neighbor whose daughter Mara had nursed spoke highly of her in town. The rancher who'd received food stopped listening to Morrison's accusations. Sam sang Mara's praises to anyone who'd listen. Gradually, the tide began to turn again. The breaking point came in Ellen's 5th winter, when a blizzard hit with such ferocity that it caught everyone unprepared. The Morrisons, who'd been struggling since their barn burned, found themselves with cattle scattered and freezing, no shelter, and no way to save them alone. Cole heard about it in town and came home with a question in his eyes. The Morrisons need help, he said. They'll lose everything if someone doesn't step in. Mara was mending clothes by the fire, Ellen at her feet playing with a doll Sam had carved. She didn't look up. And you want to help them. I want to be the kind of person who helps even when the other person doesn't deserve it. They called me a witch. They tried to destroy our reputation. They're the reason Mr. Hastings won't serve us. I know. Cole knelt beside her chair. And if you say no, I won't go. This is your decision. Mara thought about Mrs. Fletcher, about the woman who'd shown her kindness when she had nothing, about how that kindness had changed everything. She thought about Ellen and James, about what kind of people she wanted them to become. We help them, she said finally, but not because they deserve it, because we're better than they are. They rode out in the screaming cold, Cole and Sam and Mara bundled against wind that felt like knives. The Hendersons came too, and together they spent 2 days rounding up Morrison cattle, bringing them to the Bennett Ranch for shelter, saving animals that would have died otherwise. Frank Morrison watched them work with an expression caught between humiliation and grudging gratitude. When it was over and his cattle were safe in the Bennett barn, he stood in front of Mara, his hat in his hands. I don't deserve this, he said, the words clearly painful. No, you don't, Mara agreed. But your cattle didn't do anything wrong, and I won't let animals suffer because their owner is a fool. I said terrible things about you. You did, and you'll probably say more terrible things in the future because people like you need someone to blame when life gets hard. Mara's voice was steady, without anger or bitterness. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's right. And because I want my children to see that you respond to hatred with kindness. Not because the hater deserves kindness, but because you deserve to be the kind of person who gives it. Morrison looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He didn't apologize, men like him rarely did, but he stopped spreading rumors. And more importantly, when other people did, he told them to shut up. Spring came again, as it always did, and with it came change that Mara had been expecting. Mr. Hastings appeared at the ranch one morning looking uncomfortable. I'd like to apologize, he said without preamble. What I did, refusing to serve you, it was cowardly and wrong. And I'd understand if you never forgive me, but I'm asking if you'd consider giving me your business again. Mara, who was in the garden planting with Ellen's help, stood and brushed dirt from her hands. Why now? Because I watched you save Frank Morrison's cattle when he'd done nothing but try to hurt you, and I realized I'd rather be the kind of person who does business with someone like you than someone like him. Hastings met her eyes. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I forgive you, Mara said simply, but I won't forget. And the next time someone tries to make you choose between profit and principle, I expect you to choose better. Yes, ma'am. The years continued to roll forward, each one adding layers to the life Mara and Cole were building. Ellen grew into a strong, confident girl who could ride and rope as well as any boy and wasn't afraid to use her voice. James followed his sister's lead, quieter but equally determined. A third child arrived, another daughter they named Ruth, who had Mara's dark eyes and Cole's easy smile. The ranch prospered, the reputation they'd built for quality cattle and fair dealing spread, and buyers sought them out specifically. They built a new barn, expanded the house, added more land. Sam married a town girl and started his own small operation on property adjacent to theirs. The Hendersons became almost like family, their children and Mara's growing up together. And slowly, inevitably, Mara became simply one of the community rather than the foreign woman who'd married Cole Bennett. Her accent never faded. She would always carry the old country in her voice, but it stopped being the first thing people noticed. What they saw instead was a successful rancher, a devoted mother, a woman who'd helped countless neighbors and never asked for anything in return. One summer afternoon, when Ellen was 10 and already talking about running the ranch someday, Mara and Cole rode out to check the far pastures. They'd left the children with Martha Henderson, stolen a few hours for themselves, and now sat on their horses looking over land that was thick with healthy cattle and green grass. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Cole asked, "when you first arrived?" "Sometimes. It feels like a different person's life." In some ways, it was. He looked at her, this woman who'd changed everything. "You were looking for security when you came here, a husband who could provide for you, a stable future. And I found all that, just not the way I expected. You found more than that. You built an empire." Mara laughed. "This is hardly an empire." "Isn't it? Look around. We have 320 acres, 200 head of cattle, employees, children who'll inherit something worth having. We're one of the most successful operations in the county, and it's largely because of you." "It's because of us," Mara corrected. "You had the land and the knowledge. I had the determination and the willingness to try things others wouldn't." "Like water witching." "Like water witching," she agreed. "Like helping the Morrisons. Like refusing to be small when people wanted to make me small." They rode in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the wind through the grass. Then Cole said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Mara's heart jumped. His tone was too serious. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The opposite, actually." He pulled his horse to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I got a letter from a cattle broker in Chicago. He wants to contract with us exclusively, guaranteed purchases at premium prices for the next 5 years. It would make us more money than I ever dreamed of making." "That's wonderful. So why do you sound worried?" "Because it would mean expanding even more, hiring more help, probably traveling to Chicago several times a year to meet with buyers. And I wanted to make sure—" He paused. "I wanted to make sure that's what you want, that you're not just going along with my dreams." Mara considered the question seriously. What did she want? Once she'd wanted safety and security. Then she'd wanted acceptance and belonging. Now, sitting on a horse overlooking land that was partly hers, with children waiting at home and a future stretching out full of possibility, what did she want? "I want to keep building," she said finally. "I want Ellen to inherit something so successful that no one will ever question her worth. I want James and Ruth to have opportunities we never had. And I want us to prove that the immigrant girl with the accent and the rancher everyone said would fail can build something that outlasts us both." Cole grinned. "So that's a yes to the Chicago contract?" "That's a yes to everything." They sealed the deal that fall, and the ranch entered a new phase of growth and prosperity. The success brought new challenges, managing more employees, handling complex contracts, balancing expansion with sustainability. But Mara had learned that challenges were just opportunities in disguise. When Ellen was 13, she asked Mara about the old country for the first time in years. "What was it like? Where you came from?" They were in the kitchen together, making bread the way Mrs. Fletcher had taught Mara over a decade ago. Ellen's hands worked the dough with practiced competence. "It was beautiful in its own way," Mara said. "Mountains and forests and villages that had been there for centuries. But it was also hard. Opportunities were limited, especially for women. If you weren't born into the right family, you stayed where you were forever." "Is that why you left?" "Partly, but also because I was young and brave and foolish enough to think I could build something better somewhere else." "You did build something better." "We did," Mara corrected gently. "Your father and I together, and someday you will too." Ellen looked up, her eyes so like Cole's, bright with determination. "I'm going to make this ranch even bigger. I'm going to prove that a woman can run an operation as well as any man." Mara smiled. "You're going to be magnificent." Time moved forward relentlessly. Cole's hair went gray, then white. Mara found silver threads in her own dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. Ellen grew into a young woman who could outcourse any rancher in the county. James developed a talent for the business side, taking over more of the accounts and contracts. Ruth, the youngest, showed signs of wanting something different. She talked about teaching, about college, about a world beyond the ranch. "Let her go," Mara told Cole when he worried about Ruth's ambitions. "We built this so our children could choose their own futures. If hers lies elsewhere, we support that." They celebrated their 20th anniversary on a warm spring evening, sitting on the porch that had witnessed so many important moments. The children were grown, or nearly so. The ranch was more successful than either had imagined possible, and the town that had once rejected Mara now counted her among its most respected citizens. "Any regrets?" Cole asked, holding her hand the way he had on their wedding day. Mara thought about the question, about Thomas Caldwell and his cruel rejection, about the closed doors and the whispered insults, about the drought and the accusations and the constant struggle to prove herself worthy. "Not a single one," she said. "Every hard thing led me here. To you, to this life, to children who'll never know what it's like to be told they're not good enough because of something they can't control." Thomas Caldwell was the biggest fool who ever lived. "No?" Mara smiled. "He was exactly who he needed to be. Because if he'd married me, I would have spent my life trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to hide my accent and my strength and everything that makes me who I am. He did me a favor by rejecting me. I should send him a thank you letter. He left Kansas years ago. Last I heard, he was alone in Boston, still looking for the perfect wife he'll never find because perfection isn't real." She squeezed Cole's hand. "But we don't need to think about him. He stopped mattering the day I walked away." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. In the barn, Sam was finishing evening chores. In the house, Ruth was practicing piano, a luxury they could afford now, filling the air with music. This was the life Mara had crossed an ocean to find. Not the one she'd imagined, sitting on that ship watching America grow larger on the horizon. Something better. Something real. Something earned through determination and courage, and refusing to accept anyone else's definition of who she should be. Years later, when both Cole and Mara had passed and Ellen ran the ranch with her own children beside her, people would ask about the foreign woman who'd helped build one of the most successful ranches in Kansas. Ellen would tell them the story, about the runaway horses and the rejected proposal, about water witching and helping enemies, about a woman who'd been told she wasn't good enough and had responded by becoming extraordinary. But on that spring evening, sitting on the porch with the man who'd seen her worth when no one else would, Mara didn't think about legacy or history or what people would say. She thought about how the wind felt on her face, how Cole's hand felt in hers, how the prairie grass moved like waves on an ocean she'd crossed so long ago. She thought about home, not the one she'd left behind, but the one she'd built with her own hands from nothing but hope and stubborn determination. The one where her accent was just part of who she was, not a flaw to be hidden. The one where she was loved not despite her differences, but because of everything she was. This was the future she'd claimed, not by waiting for it to be given, but by fighting for it every single day until it became real. And it was more than she'd ever dared to dream.